That's a good question for this group. Okay, this is kind of a standard thing you run into. Management is blocking. What are you going to do? You're the Agile leader. You're the Agile coach. You're the Agile leader. You're the Scrum Master, whatever. The management's blocking. What are you going to do? You're sitting around waiting for management to fix themselves, you're in the wrong role, right? And one of the best Scrum Masters I've ever seen is in New Zealand. He put a sticker on a big sticky on his chest. We're wasting $50,000 a month. And he just walked around the company with that sticker. CFO pulled him into his office and says, why are we losing that money? And he explained to the CFO, and what do you think happened then? That manager was told to get his act together, he's going to get fired. That's what happened. I mean, there's no toleration for a manager that's wasting $50,000 a month. You can hire 3 new managers for that. And they'll all be better than the one you just fired, right? I mean, every CFO understands that. This is not rocket science.
You'll notice that, Jeff, you use numbers, and it's incredibly powerful if you have those sort of numbers. And I think that's one of the most important attributes of I don't want to say a modern Scrum Master, because that sounds like it wasn't true years ago, but good Scrum Masters that I've worked with and good Agile coaches that I've worked with have definitely always arm themselves with metrics and use them effectively to drive their point home. Yeah, and I think it can be incredibly successful if they do that.
The other aspect of this I don't see enough is somebody needs to tell the team that they suck.
Well, I think corporations need to stop accepting mediocrity in some cases.
Absolutely. And who's going to tell them?
Yeah.
If you're waiting around for a manager, you're wasting your time. You need to tell them that.
Yeah.
I mean, that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I'm sure, Joe, you've got lots of questions, but I'm going to bring this up because it's a little bit sort of ironic. I think, when you go and see the Red Sox, I don't know if anybody goes and sees the Red Sox, particularly this season, because talking about mediocrity, but if you go and see the Red Sox, there's 24,000 people there. 23,500 people don't really care about the Red Sox. I mean, they care about them, but they're there to eat hot dogs, drink beer, have a laugh, and have fun. And I do worry sometimes when I go into organizations and there's 500 people that really care about the Red Sox and they're making notes and, they know on bat averages and all this kind of stuff. I worry that sometimes when I go in organizations, there is definitely a feeling of mediocrity that they're going to the Red Sox. Yes, they like the Red Sox, but they could go to another team and just have just as good a time. And yes, they enjoy a day out. It's like they have to work, they have to be there. And I worry that organizations ultimately aren't necessarily built around delivering value. They're not focused on, they're sort of built around, I don't know, status, position, power, all of these sort of things that seem to get in the way, because it's pretty simple, right? Align a team, empower them, give them the right skills, give them the right support, throw them at a customer, at a problem, and you'll get great results. Measurement's pretty easy in those situations. Improvement's pretty easy because you got these chunks. But it seems that everything, it just seems that you're not actually there to do that. You're there to do other stuff. And it just happens that we're also delivering value as well.
I do see that apathy where I think people value more keeping busy than they do actually delivering something. And, I've worked with teams. One of the things I did at my company was, since we're using Jira to track all the work, I created these reports and metrics using a plugin including things like process efficiency and cycle time and so forth. And I introduced it to the teams and I said to them, listen, when you're in your retrospectives, here's some metrics that you can use. You can look at every sprint, you can look at past sprints, you can look at trends, and you can see not only, you know, how your forecasting is going and your planning is going, but you can also see how your efficiency is going. And I had them come back to me and say, we're working our tails off just to get what is being dumped on us every sprint done. And now you're telling us we have to be efficient too. You know, and like, how do you answer that question? But it is that it's like, yeah, well, do you like having stuff dumped on you? Do you like being forced to commit to more work than you can get done?
Okay, all of you here are Agile coaches of some sort. When somebody tells you something that's stupid, do you sit there and say nothing? Now, everybody has their own style. Some people are really polite, but persistent. Some people are more in your face. But I think anyone here has the capability to just say, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I mean, I had an executive action team at one of the biggest pharmaceuticals and most successful. I can't believe how successful they were. I won't mention the name. But the executives, I was complaining about the performance of the executive action team. And the executives all said, well, we have 5 other initiatives other than the one we're working on here. And we're spending 80 hours a week. That's why we're so tired and unable to deliver. And I said, well, how many of those other initiatives are you getting done? They said, none. I said, why don't you all just take one of those initiatives and just do that plus the executive action team in 40 hours a week, and you'll actually get something done. And they said, oh, we can't do that because then we wouldn't get our bonus.
And
yeah, we only get bonus by looking busy. We don't get bonus by getting anything done. Now that company had such a money machine that
it didn't really matter.
Didn't matter to them. So what I did, you know, was scrumming customer. I said, you know, we're wasting our time in this company. Better things to do. It's not for all our Agile coaches are complaining. It's misery. We got to get our coaches out of there before they, you know, quit Scrum Inc. because their jobs suck so bad because of this idiocy. And we sent our VP of business development in to the management and we negotiated our way out of the contract. We pulled everybody out of there as quickly as possible because it's a waste of time, it's demotivating to people, and it makes no sense. And that's what I would recommend to all of you. You have a limited amount of time in this earth. Find the place where you can really make a difference.
So the guide, the Scrum guide now is less prescriptive than earlier versions. It's the most lean Scrum guide I think we've had, right, since its conception. Meanwhile, business agility is bringing in loads of non-software newbies. How will these newbies ever figure it out if, for example, they do not have clarity on who owns the daily Scrum? I admit that the ownership is strongly implied in the guide, but it's not 100% explicit.
So I think, okay, so that's a really interesting question. And I pretty much thought that it was pretty explicit in the guide, but maybe I haven't read it as recently. So I actually think the 2020 Scrum Guide is, and you know, all homage to Jeff and Ken here for doing a fantastic job here. I think it's more positioned for business agility than it's ever been. All the software words have been removed or certainly changed to make them more applicable. I think it's definitely more consumable than it's ever been. With respect to nuances and details, daily Scrum notwithstanding, I actually think that ultimately perhaps the most important thing about the guide is that it's about encouraging people to take ownership of the outcomes and the work that they're focused on. And it is ultimately, it's incomplete, and you do need to enact it and instantiate it in your situation. I hope that people are smart enough. The problem we have is that, you know, most of the people have been through a school system, an education system, a work system that's very much built around mass production, Taylorism, Henry Ford, etc. And everybody's looking for this silver bullet document that can solve every single problem. And ultimately, it can't do that. What it can do is provide an amazing framework that can then hopefully empower and equip these people that aren't necessarily in IT and aren't from our history to take advantage of it. I don't know about the daily Scrum. I could read it now to see if it's clear, but I think it is very usable by business agile people.
There's lots of patterns to solve this problem, but the fundamental principle, somebody needs to jump in and facilitate that meeting and keep it moving.
And it doesn't have to be the Scrum Master, Jeff, right?
Yeah, and sometimes the Scrum Master is not going to be there. Maybe they're sick, maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're solving some problem, and the meeting needs to go on anyway. And
I think like the lowest performing teams are the ones that sit there waiting for the Scrum Master before they start the stand up. They get to a higher level of proficiency and they know the drill. They're there, they're ready to plan, they're starting to talk to each other. That's the kind of engagement we want to see on teams.
Because if they rely on the Scrum Master, it becomes a crutch, right?
Yeah.
And then they fall into old habits potentially of being told what to do for the next 24 hours, because they won't get fired if somebody tells them what to do and it's wrong.
You know, speaking again with about the Scrum Master and the Scrum Master accountability. So in this hypothetical question, if a Scrum team, and maybe it's not hypothetical, if a Scrum team is working like a machine, proper refinement, they're sizing, they got good velocity, they're improving, but they're not dependent on the Scrum events. Should we challenge them? Do they actually need a Scrum Master, or could they just survive with just a coach?
What do you mean by they're not dependent on the Scrum?
So they're not using the Scrum events?
Yeah, or they're not using them consistently.
yeah, I have a good example.
The question was from me. So what I just meant is like they are not dependent on Scrum Master for the Scrum ceremonies. They know if it's 8 o'clock, log in, give your update, go out. It's like the dream team. So at that situation, what happens?
I was in France a while back, and some people said to me, "Hey Jeff, they're not doing Scrum over at Google in Paris anymore." I said, "Oh, what are they doing?" They said, "Well, they sit around a table, they talk all day together. They don't have a daily Scrum. They have sticky notes on the wall in prioritized order. And if there's an impediment, that's always the top sticky note. And when anyone's free, they go to the top sticky note and they work on it. If they don't know how to do it, they learn how." I said, "I think that's a high-performing team. Are they high-performing?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "Don't worry about them, because they are essentially there's the 3 pillars of Scrum, but underneath that, there's a structure of kind of multiple smaller pillars that make Scrum work. And that team had all the, the 3 pillars are, transparency, inspection, and adaptation. But then under that, there are these pillars that have to do with making sure you're always working on the top impediment, making sure that you're always cross-functional, make sure that you're always training, because as the average level of knowledge on the team goes up, the velocity of the team automatically improves. And that Google team is doing all of this. They don't need to have a daily meeting when they're talking about each other, when they're talking 8 hours a day about what they're doing, or maybe even more, face to face, sitting at the table looking at each other, right? I had teams like that at Patient Keeper, which is still, I haven't seen any group of teams anywhere that performed as well as Patient Keeper in its heyday. And all the teams that were working face to face around a table every day, and most of them did not have a daily scrum. They had the daily scrums every day, but most of the scrum teams have a daily scrum every day because they're talking to each other face to face. They come in the morning, they automatically kind of check in face to face. And then anytime there's a problem or a decision to make, they're there all together and saying, you know, what should we do now? I have this, can somebody help me? It's just a dialogue that goes on. And the Google team was like that. So I knew they had to be really fast. And that's good, because fast is the speed of innovation is the primary driver of success in today's world. And I think even in the past, particularly in the software domain.
Okay. Yep, keep those questions coming, guys, if you have more. This one comes in from Sarah Florimon. I'm not sure I understand the question totally, but I'm going to read it. And then Sarah, if you need to clarify, please do. Sarah's working as an enterprise coach currently. Her organization has spent a lot of time training Scrum Masters and product owners, but they have not spent a lot of time training management or developers. They are having trouble with horizontal versus vertical stories. Is there a good way to coach the teams to work more towards vertical stories?
In many companies, we've had this problem where the testers were not part of the single story on the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the testing would tend to get done later than the sprint. And so I basically, you know, if I'm the coach, I tell the management, you're going to be really slow. And then they always say, well, we can't do it any other way. And I said, well, do a little experiment. Get one story with all the testing done inside the sprint as part of that story, and then figure out how long that takes. And let everybody do all the other stories like they've always been doing it with these separate QA stories. And then compare how many hours does it take to do a story done inside the sprint as one story versus the other way. And the answer is always, it takes 24 times longer. It's a hardware software thing, not a simple software thing. And once the managers realize it takes 24 times longer, I remember one of the companies here locally in Massachusetts, the senior VP in charge of technology said, well, I'll fire the head of the QA, but he's a really nice guy. So why don't you send one of your really experienced coaches up here to work the pair with him and get him to actually run an agile team instead of making us 24 times slower. So no, that is a really bad practice that causes extreme damage. So you need to make it visible.
The other thing is from less about data. I mean, what's done mean? What happens delivering code in that example and without testing it is it's as valuable as a chocolate teacup, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and just for the record, tea is hot, therefore a chocolate teacup would melt. I know, sorry, there's lots of Americans on the line. You probably have cold tea or something, but which is a travesty on so many levels. But the but the point is, it doesn't add any value. If the world stopped today, having loads of code done is not incredibly productive. It's only when it's been tested ultimately. And then it all comes back to, how do we incentivize people as well? If you incentivize people by their own work and not the collective value that team is delivering, then ultimately I think you're always, I tell you what, I wouldn't be, if you're measuring me on how much code I'm delivering, I'm going to write myself a minivan, or how many stories I code. If you incentivize people on actually delivering the chunks of value, then of course the data that Jeff mentioned becomes incredibly important. If, however, you incentivize, one task, one person, let's go and hand it off. Hey, it's not my problem. Then you're going to have all sorts of problems.
Sorry, I also think that if your team has been together for a while and operating this way and they think they're doing good Scrum, they think this is the way it's supposed to be done, then you have to think of a creative way to help them see how wasteful it is to operate this way. Like, what are the wait states between all of the things that they're doing with their dev story, then a QA story, and how much is actually getting done in terms of outcome? Because if they're being incented, like Jeff was just saying, if they're being incented differently by their engineering manager for the number of lines of code they write, then you might as well not try banging your head against that wall. They're going to continue to operate the way that they are.
I've had other Scrum Masters say to me, I can't do my job and transform this team because the manager won't let me. The manager, and again, I say to the same thing, what's the incentive of the manager? If the manager is not going to be incentivized to build a self-managing team, then they're not going to do it.
But it's interesting, Joe, because it's sometimes the organization actually isn't built like that. And even if you go to HR and you look at the incentive plans, etc. But in people's heads, they've sort of evolved to that sort of way of thinking that I'm not going to get fired if I do my job really well, in spite of everybody else's disaster. People will not reward me for helping others. They reward me for doing my own thing. And I think it comes back to our education system. I think it comes back to many of our sports. Unfortunately, we talk about the quarterback. We don't talk about the fact that it's an entire defensive line. Look at me talking about American sport. Hope you're all proud. The defensive line that kept Brady looking amazing and didn't get people beating him up and stuff. The point is, and of course the quarterback always says, well, it's a team effort. But he's on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
I think, Jeff, when you talked about Rocket Mortgage, something you said in that podcast was very hit home with me. And you said if the Scrum Masters are not improving their teams and helping their teams to go faster, they were removed. They were removed out of the release train. If the product owners weren't, producing twice the value in half the time, they were removed out of the release train. And if the managers weren't promoting self-management and removing impediments, they were removed from the release train. My expectation is that all of those roles, though, were informed of what was expected out of them.
Actually, yeah.
Right.
And it's because the management were the coaches. They were the management were the trained Scrum at Scale trainers. And so as a result, they could just set it up and make it work properly. Yeah, the best Scrum implementation is going to be where the Agile leader is the senior manager. And we've seen that over and over again. The companies that work best is, in fact, the Openview Venture Partners calls it the Steve Jobs model. The chief product owner is the senior executive. And we've noticed in every oil company we've moved into, the oil companies do that. They do it division by division. The division head will say, I'm going to be the chief product owner. I'm going to be at every executive action team meeting. It's going to happen every day. And then the whole division gets in line. And they do amazing things. So
would you say that that's step one? Would you recommend that that's step one is in preparing the leadership is to train them to be Scrum coaches or Scrum at Scale coaches?
Yeah, to be an Agile leader, you need training to be an Agile leader, and every manager in an Agile company needs to be an Agile leader.
Yeah.
So they all need training.